architecture and get into the machine if there's a weak key. And like I said, the decoder is, if someone wants to demo this with a Debian.
cr0.org.
Oh yeah, CR0, yeah, that's right.
Thanks.
Thanks. So I mean, if someone wants to try this out, I'm sure that it would work. It makes perfect sense that it would work, but we didn't have time to do this. We found it at the very last minute, so.
And any questions on the SSH bugs before we move on to some other applications?
One thing we should also point out about that is, like, even if you're, say, running like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you're like, oh, this doesn't affect me. I pay good money for it, Enterprise Linux. Then, you know, one of your users is learning how to use Linux, and they're like, I want to run Linux too. They download Ubuntu, you know, and they figure out this whole SSH thing and upload their key. So even though you think you're not affected, if a user generates their own key on a vulnerable system and places it on your system, your entire server is open to attack. And it's not like there are no local kernel vulnerabilities in Linux.
And there's also some really beautiful PAM timing attacks with SSH. It's very easy to find out if a user exists on a given system, completely unrelated to this bug. So if you combine a couple of other OpenSSH issues together, you can probably get pretty far. And as Dino was just mentioning, the Linux kernel is rock solid and has no problems. So I mean, if someone were to get a user local account, it would be impossible for them to root it, obviously.
Yeah.
Sarcasm.
So,
you guys are limiting yourself to discussing Linux here, but what about, you know, Solaris and other things? It's all the same, I assume.
Absolutely.
the question is whether other Unix flavors are affected, and they are affected if they do talk to a Debian system. So if somebody from Solaris logs on to a Debian with a weak SSL, then they are affected too, yes.
Yeah. Or if those keys were moved to the Solaris box.
Exactly, or if the keys were generated locally, which is often the case. Users do typically keep the private portion of the key on their home machine or on whatever machine they use to log in. And so this is where the keys are generated. And often the administrators have no ideas where the keys come from.
What do you do, in the audience, what do we do to protect ourselves? Is there a way?
We will get to countermeasures in a minute.
Yeah. If you guys want to ask questions, either use the microphone or and line up. That would probably be better.
We have 2 mics. With
Yeah, 2
glowing
mics.
Red dots.
The nice MC over there.
So all the people at home can follow along.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Great presentation. The best cryptographic system in the world can be defeated by a keylogger, correct? And
Yes.
unless you have 100% physical security, it's very easy for a keylogger to pick all this stuff up and break it all. Do you have any thoughts about how you can defeat keyloggers and how you can get around that vulnerability?
Well, so in this case, a keylogger is definitely a different problem. The thing here is that we can passively record your traffic without access to either of the systems, and at any point in the future, depending on the details of the protocol, decrypt it. So if you're using a Debian system that's vulnerable to this, basically all of the cryptographic operations that you do are totally broken, and you might as well not even bother encrypting them. So the keylogger portion is a very different problem entirely. But I mean, the real issue here is that random numbers can break even the strongest ciphers and the best protocols if they're poorly generated.
I didn't mean to be off topic, but I didn't know if you had any thoughts about keyloggers and how to get around them.
Keyloggers can be defeated by multi-factor authentication. So beyond something that you know, you should have something in your possession that proves that you are you, and something that you cannot just steal by copying some data off.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So moving on to some other applications.
Well, I had just one quick question
Yes.
about the SSH. So we had a joke at work that when this thing was made public, it was like, well, this is Christmas for both the NSA and the bad guys, because if they'd been recording a whole bunch of traffic for the past year, suddenly they got all, you know,
What's
all
the
the
difference?
plain text. Well, so my question is, has there been any like implication or knowledge come forward about anything bad that's happened because of this? I mean, we know that this is really bad, but has any fallout or aftermath?
I mean, I've had some dealings with the DHS asking me to help them with things, which I mentioned yesterday in my cold boot talk, and I don't think you have a lot to worry about from some wings of the government. I mean, sorry. I mean, there are definitely. I mean, if the NSA wants to own you, you're screwed. I mean, you can't beat them. But I think that this is, unfortunately, if you were using Debian and you were under surveillance, you're in deep shit. There's no question. I mean, all it takes is some time. I mean, that's the interesting thing. I mean, security is useful for, I mean, you need to evaluate your risks and then determine what you actually have as a threshold. Because in this case, something that a couple of days ago seemed like it would be good for years and years and years, turns out that it's not. So whatever you were doing, if you were trying to hide it, you probably failed miserably. And it's not your fault. And that's kind of the nature of it, I guess.
That's why I don't use computers.
I just want to live in the forest, take photographs.
Now, my question is, has this had any fallout, or has there been any change in the Debian procedures and protocols for who gets to work on the crypto packages when they're packaging them for Debian? Or, basically, has Debian put in place any practices or procedures to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again?
Well, let's ask Micah Anderson. He's a Debian developer on the security team.
No.
Excellent. All right.
But good procedures were in place before. They were just violated in two places where the patch was not propagated up properly, and the patch was issued before the announcement. So both of which I think.
Well, that's not actually a policy Jake mentioned earlier. That.
Okay, it should be one.
It's a suggestion. But
okay,
it's not a
suggestion, not a policy. All right. It should probably be a policy to not publicly disclose the patches before security releases.
It is a policy for issues that are embargoed and under vendor sec, but if they are already publicly known on the internet, there's no point in hiding them.
But that bug wasn't publicly known on the internet.
Right, it wasn't actually known as a security bug right away. So the patch was applied to Subversion without understanding that there was a...
I see, right.
So it wasn't known as a security bug, so it was already revealed on the internet before it was...
Great,
known.
that makes sense.
I guess my question was more along the lines of who gets permission actually to submit a patch on crypto code? Have they vetted the people who have the commit privileges there?
Just to talk to the vetting issue, I once sat in a room with a bunch of NSA, DoD, FBI types at Cisco, and they were talking about how since everyone in the room was vetted, they could talk freely about their plans to want to control the internet. And then they talked about a bunch of other stuff that they shouldn't have talked about in front of me because I have next to no respect for them. And basically, I think the vetting process sometimes can lead to something good, but the Debian way of dealing with this, which maybe Micah can speak to, is about as reasonable, I think, as any vetting process can be, which is, well, if you want to mention how every Debian developer can upload any package into the repository and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the question goes further upstream. Who in the OpenSSH development team has access to commit things to that repository, and what's the vetting process there? I mean, you can keep going. I don't know how interesting that really is, because how do you trust those people?
Yeah, it's like a group of activists that once did a GBG key signing party refused to sign my key because I wouldn't provide government issued ID.
Right, exactly.
I was like, are you kidding me?
Can you trust them?
I mean, here I am. This is me. You're signing my key, and that represents me. Well, we need a driver's license.
Right.
Right, cool. Well, I know I don't want to talk to you.
Can I just point out one thing that you were mentioning earlier?
Sure.
You were mentioning that if you had a Solaris box, for example, and a Debian or Ubuntu user used SSH keys to connect to it, then you might have an issue with this particular problem. But I think it's actually a much larger problem than that, because the possible keys that could be generated for a host key or for an SSH authentication key are a limited set, and unless those keys are blacklisted so that your Solaris box can't generate them, there is a set of something like 32,000 keys that could potentially be generated and anyone could use to log into your Solaris box. Whether or not you have a Debian or Ubuntu user, you should have a blacklist of these keys, otherwise you're compromised.
Right. Well,
Because
so
it's a known set.
Well, so it's complicated because you have basically a lot more than 2 to the 15th of keys. You have 2 to the 15th of keys per architecture, and you have variable based on algorithm, and then you also have something based on key size. So like John Gilmore, for example, is a really funny guy, and I respect him a lot. So when he generates SSH keys, he picks a random number above like 4098 or something like this. That's somewhere between that and like some ridiculously high number for his RSA keys, so that if someone builds a pre-computed table of 1024-bit, 2048, 4096-bit keys or whatever, he's not going to fall into the like pre-computed table.
It's off by 1.
Because it's, or off by like 1,000. And that doesn't protect him, but it would protect him against the fact that everybody that uses the default is the main person that will be targeted. But it also means generating a blacklist is really difficult, because the blacklist is going to potentially give false negatives. Because you could have a weak key that doesn't fit into the nice, neat blacklist, because it would take a long time to generate, even with only 2 to the 15th, you would still have a lot of, I mean, if you have a 2000-bit key, well, now you have to generate 2 to the 15th of those keys. So there's a lot there. Blacklisting is very difficult. Okay, hi. So I'm also working on Tor. And Tor was affected by this. We got away very luckily. This could have been a lot worse. Basically, there's about 1,500 to 2,000 Tor relays. You should all run one. About 300 of them, several of them were my machines actually, which was very disappointing. They had weak keys, and anyone that was using a circuit that consisted entirely of those 300 relays, their traffic could potentially, basically, if someone were to write a tool, please don't write a tool, but if someone were to write a tool, it would be possible to decrypt it. We detected all of these machines basically instantaneously. When we learned about the vulnerability, we published the blacklist into the directory authorities so that clients that were using the Tor network would basically not select the 300 servers that had weak keys. So we protected our users right off the bat, and those 300 servers continued to run, but no one was talking to them or using them, which was good. It's definitely bad to have a lot of servers all on a single platform in this regard. This also affected hidden services. So if you've ever used the .onion address, the identity keys for .onions, those hidden services were also generated in the same way as any other key. And as a result, those could be spoofed. And you could publish a descriptor to the network. And when the introduction was set up, it would be possible to do in man-in-the-middle. In theory, the only thing stopping that is the cryptographic key, and it was weak as well. Very bad things could have happened if 4 of the 6 directory servers had been vulnerable. This is why I said we got really lucky. So specifically the version 3 protocol, the directory authorities have to build a majority consensus. So 3 is bad, but 4 would have been a lot worse. 3, basically, you could say like, well, I'm going to spoof these specific directory authorities, and I'm going to have these directory authorities prefer these servers and suggest these recommended versions. There's just things that you can do because the Tor client does take a queue from the directory authority. And you can override it, obviously, in the config file, but many people don't. Luckily, though, there were only 3, so we changed those keys immediately. But we continued to sign the network status with the old keys as well as the new keys until we then removed them. This was pretty much the best case scenario. It could have been a lot worse, and we were very lucky. And as far as Tor users that were using Debian, so previous stuff could be for any platform, but Tor users that were using Debian were affected by all of the above. New package replaced the weak keys, just like move them out of the way. But the worst thing is that it doesn't matter what Tor relays you are using, because basically you have the Diffie-Hellman problem, you have all of the other bugs, all the entropy issues, and every cryptographic operation you perform that uses random numbers is pretty much broken. So if you were a Debian user using Tor, bad news for you. And so again, please don't write the tool for decrypting that. It wouldn't help anybody.